resuming the Budget Committee meeting, and next up on our agenda is Heather Pedersen and the report of Compensation Board for elected officials. We have about 40 minutes for this discussion, so 20 for presentation, 20 for any questions.
So, Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
I see that our
county administrator is walking through the door right now.
Here he's coming. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Now we can begin.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good morning, commissioners and budget committee members. My name is Heather Pedersen. I'm the county's classification and compensation manager. I work in human resources under Evelyn Minor Lawrence. With me today, I have two of the citizen members of the compensation board for elected officials. Colleen Wilson is our newest member this year, and therefore she was chair. They do that. They like to do that to the new members. And Colleen has over 30 years of experience in human resources, payroll, and compensation management. And she's currently the HR director for Princeton Property Management. Elisa Grandy, this is her second year on the compensation board. And Elisa has over 12 years of HR experience. Actually, I wrote that last year. Maybe you have 13 now. HR management and compensation experience she was with Home Depot before she retired to become a entrepreneur and owner-operator of a food cart business. And Gary Martin, who really wanted to be here today but couldn't, is our third member. He is a retiree with over 27 years of experience in human resources. He was the HR director of Portland State University and the Oregon court system. And he also served on this county's compensation board in the early 90s. So he's traveling home from a trip, so he won't be here today. So just to go over the compensation board's role, the compensation board for elected officials is guided by Oregon Revised Statute 204.112. And that outlines the annual process for the county compensation boards and gives these boards authority to review the compensation of elected officials and make recommendations to the county's budget committees. The statute provides general guidelines and considerations regarding how the compensation board determines their recommendations, and that includes the review of comparable positions within the labor market and consideration of factors such as internal alignment and compression. The ORS also provides more specific direction related to the sheriff, which states that the sheriff's salary shall be fixed in an amount which is not less than that for any member of the sheriff's department. That's kind of a vague distinction, so our county's compensation board has defined that and has historically interpreted this to mean that the sheriff shall make at least $1 more per month than the highest paid undersheriff. So methodology of the compensation board for elected officials. The methodology that they've adopted includes collecting market data from comparable jurisdictions, and those are mostly in the Portland metro area, but we do look at a few other counties outside of the Portland metro area, and then they adjust the data as appropriate. And what that means is some jurisdictions pay the PERS portion for employees, some don't, some pay deferred comp, some don't. So we do make a few adjustments to make it an apples to apples comparison when we look at those monthly salaries. The labor market used by the compensation board includes Clark, Deschutes, Lane, Marion, Multnomah, and Washington counties, as well as the cities of Portland and Vancouver and Metro. Last year, the compensation board also began looking at the Oregon Judicial Department for matches for our Justice of the Peace position. In recent years, the compensation board's philosophy has been to try to maintain elected official salaries within plus or minus 3%. And beginning last year, their recommendations really aimed to bring elected positions up to market parity, up to that market average. Internal alignment with elected officials' second in commands is also and continues to be looked at every year to make sure we don't have compression issues. So finally, Based on their review and the review of all the data, this board met 4 times to discuss the recommendations. We had 2 elected officials come and visit and share information. Those were our newest elected officials, the Brian Nava, the treasurer, and Tammy Little, the new assessor. They both came and presented some information and met the compensation board. For fiscal year 2019-2020, the Compensation Board's recommendations are intended to bring those positions that are below market average to market parity, or where there is compression or risk of compression with the second in command, and that you'll see with the district attorney. As outlined in the full report that this budget committee received from the Compensation Board, 5 of the 7 elected official positions are recommended to receive increases this year. So for the position of assessor, the assessor was found to be 9% below market average. Therefore, this compensation board is recommending a 9% increase to bring the position to market parity. One thing, I know that this is a large number. One change this year was that this compensation board approved a new match with Washington County. They had not historically used Washington County as a match. They added it this year, so that did affect the market and the average. So a 9% gap there between our current salary and market average. Last year, you approved a 3% increase for assessor.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Heather?
I said last year you approved a 3% increase for assessor. The position of clerk was found to be 2.7% below market this year. Therefore, a 2.7% increase is recommended to bring that position up to market. Last year, you approved a 4.6% increase. This year, commissioner is 5.5% below market average. 5.5% increase is recommended to bring it up to market. Last year, this board approved a 6.4% increase for commissioner. And one of the significant things we noticed this year is that several of the comparables that we use received some significant increases. So that's where you're seeing it wasn't just a cost of living increase for those elected positions. Some received, between 6 and 9% increases. The district attorney is actually 1.5% above market this year. However, the recommendation from the compensation board is based on the internal compression between the second in command and the district attorney. Once the non-rep COLA is implemented on July 1, one of the chief deputy DDAs will be 1.8% above the district attorney, and so this recommendation hopes to achieve, some alignment back for the district attorney. You'll notice that the increase recommended says 10.43%. That is based only on the county portion because the state pays the largest, probably close to 70% of the DA's salary. The other 29 to 30% comes from the county, and so they only can recommend increases on the county's portion, and so that's why that 10.43% seems large, but it's really representing a 3% overall increase on the total. And then finally, they're recommending an 8.1% increase for treasurer. The treasurer is 8.1% below market this year, so the recommendation looks to achieve market parity for the treasurer. Internal compression was also a consideration, as the deputy treasurer will be 3.3% above the treasurer once the non-rep COLA is implemented on July 1. Just a note for treasurer as well, similar to commissioner, treasurers in other counties or jurisdictions received pretty significant increases, some double digits. So that's why you're seeing such a large gap this year as well. The compensation board did not, while they did review the sheriff and justice of the peace positions, they did not recommend increases for those. The sheriff was over market this year, 16.5%. The justice of the peace was 0.3% below market, so they just chose to kind of leave it where it was. And questions?
Commissioner Bernard.
Actually, my question's really for Gary. One is, well, a couple. One, have you budgeted for this increase?
Oh, that was going to be one of mine too.
So is this included in the department budgets where these positions exist? or do they not, is it not included?
It is not included.
Okay,
So no, it is not included yet.
okay. So my other question is, you know, we have a challenging year. Is that fairly consistent with everyone? I mean,
other
like Multnomah
counties?
County, it is.
Yes, other
And-
counties are experiencing budget shortfalls. We're not alone.
Okay, and and you mentioned they got a substantial increase. Right, well, that pretty much answers my question. Yes, no, it's not included in the budget. We're looking at a budget for the county commission of a cut. And gonna get a little deeper into the details maybe later, but, all right, that answers my questions. Thank you.
Mr. Kay, yeah, thank you. Mr. Caton?
Yeah, thank you. I was wondering if was there an average increase this year in the salaries across the county? Maybe Evelyn can help answer that question in terms of what was the average increase in salaries this year across the county.
I think I can answer that, if you don't mind.
Fine. Thank you, Heather.
Well, the COLA that will be provided to all employees on July 1, or the majority of employees, is 3.5%. The merit increases, which are tied to an employee's merit month, their annual merit increases, are also 3.5% in most cases. If
About 7% total on average?
correct, yeah.
Okay.
If an employee is not topped out in their salary grade, then they would be getting 7% in this new fiscal year.
Okay, thank you.
So, Heather, you mentioned our increases that we've done in the last year. I think one of the things that would have helped me in the budget book is to have had like maybe a 4-year history or something like that of
Absolutely.
percentage and dollar increases for the various things. Because what always comes to my mind when we get to this point is, oh, I thought we raised it all to parity last year. Now, how are others, in some instances, 7 or 8% above when we were all at parity at that point in time?
It's a
I'm not
moving
sure I can
target.
understand that yet.
Yeah,
So,
it's a moving target. You know, it would be nice if everyone did the same thing. But all of our jurisdictions, and we find this when we go to look at markets for our regular employee classifications, other jurisdictions look at, you know, we don't all just look at each other. Sure, we do look at each other, but other jurisdictions look at, you know, California or Seattle or other jurisdictions. So, yeah, compensation is a moving target. Historically, the county's philosophy has been to be at market average. We didn't want to be a market leader. We didn't want to lag the market. We just wanted to be somewhere in the middle. And so this compensation board has said, you know, this whole 3% really isn't getting us where we want to be, because now we're always going to be behind. And so they changed their guidelines. And again, this is a compensation board that changes every couple years. We'll have a new member next year. So the thoughts and methodologies do change with the members, but they've always felt very strongly that, you know, these positions, they want to have good qualified people in these positions. And I think Brian and Tammy coming this year really kind of made that impact to them. They really enjoyed having the elected officials come and talk about what they do. It kind of brings a face and a name to what they do. So I don't know if that answered your question, but.
it does, thank you. Yeah, and I still think, you know, going forward, having some history in the
I have
book
all sorts
would
of
be-
history, yes.
Yeah, I
And-
knew. I tried to find some of my past stuff from other budget meetings.
Well,
but,
would it be helpful to provide that to
the?
the budget committee for your deliberations?
Yeah.
Or
That's today.
It's,
I can get it today. I can get it as soon as I walk back. Yeah.
that would be good. So another question too. So Commissioner Bernard asked if these increases were in the budget, which they are not, but the other 3.5% COLA increases across the board they're in the
Those are
budget,
budgeted.
right?
Correct.
That's,
Well,
okay, I just want to make sure we're
Unions
not,
And other employees are included.
so it's front-loaded with those and just,
But the 3.5% is not for the elected officials, correct?
no,
They were not
no.
budgeted,
Yeah.
but for the rest of the staff, yes.
Right, for the rest. Yeah, gotcha. Okay, thank you. Commissioner Savas and then Commissioner Humberston.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, and probably more than I have in years past when this particular topic has come up, is that how powerful percentage points happen to be over years in time. And I reflect back to 2011 and when I first came on the commission, and 2012 when we were negotiating our labor contracts. And we don't ever get a chance to really talk about that because it's executive session stuff that so therefore, those conversations are, really not public, but we can at least talk about percentages and what they mean. And if you just, whether it's your property tax that goes up by 3%, or whether it's, in this case, 3.5%, but it adds up, and after a while, things actually double. And actually, things double on a percentage basis, even at 3%, faster than you'd ever imagine. And my concern then, my concern now, my concern especially last year is that these percentages are going to catch up with us, and they are catching up with us. And I think that's why we're here, Gary's comment that, yeah, all governments are experiencing this. And, but I guess in a way, I had just a casual conversation with Chair Bernard on Monday, and he brought up the jaws of death. And it's a term that, I didn't invent. It was a term that I gleaned somewhere in a meeting years back. But I think what I learned out of the discussion was that Jim interpreted that as being that we're going to go bankrupt, and we can't. Government has to balance, and so I think that's a fair assumption that the word death insinuates that there's an end. But it was more about the jaws, I think, right, and that the jaws will eat you alive, and so I just want to point that out and thank you. I think the clarification was the elected officials don't receive a COLA.
Correct.
Right? But we've done that before.
Correct. So some compensation boards have chosen to, the compensation board understands that this is an awkward, game that we play with, not a game, but it's an awkward position. The commissioners are in an awkward position. The citizens are in an awkward position, and the budget committee, they can't just say, this is what you get. They have to make a recommendation, and you have to approve it or deny it. And so some compensation boards have noted that and chosen to pull apart a COLA and an individual increase based on market. And this particular compensation board, and perhaps one of you want to speak to this as well, but they've really said, the budget committee, or the budget is the budget committee's issue. They're responsible for that. We're responsible to look at the market and make recommendations based on our subject matter expertise. And so that's really what they've done, is they're not trying to make it more palatable. They're just saying, here's our recommendation, budget committee, you can approve it or not. That said, you certainly can do something different. The budget committee has to approve whatever increase or decrease, I guess, is appropriate. So
my last comment is that I always struggled with this, and and my reasons have been that I think that our pay ought to be somewhat commensurate with how healthy either the organization is or our community is. And, hence, if there was some alignment to the average family wage income or the individual income, that might be more reasonable. So we are far and away above that. So, consequently, I've not supported that, and I don't want that to be a reflection on the good work our citizens have done. So it's just a philosophical belief, and that's not anything in your line of work or efforts as a volunteer. So thank you for all the work you've done, and no disrespect intended whatsoever. It's just a philosophical belief. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I thank you for that. One of the things that we talk about is that there is no merit consideration in our recommendations. We go with our market, we go with parity, and those are the things we're looking at. So strength or weakness of the performance is not a factor for us.
Exactly.
Good points. Thank you. Commissioner Humberston, and then Ms. Coldwell.
In contrast to my colleague, I don't struggle with this at all. And I do agree with the market concept, especially when we're talking about staff and recruiting staff from wherever we can get them that are good, competent, qualified people in the various and sundry departments that we have. But they're different than elected officials. We volunteer, okay? And there are people who are serving in these same positions that make far less than we make, as well as a few that make a little bit more. There's people serving in the state legislature who clearly make less, but they're all, like me and the rest of us sitting here, volunteers. what I do believe is that when we're fat, I'm not ashamed to vote to get a pay increase. But when it's tight and we're asking others to tighten their belts, then I think we have the responsibility to do precisely the same thing. I realize that your objective is a little different than that, but we're going to go through a budget process over this next year that is going to require some cuts in all of our departments and some difficult times for our staff. And as leaders, we need to set the example and be leaders. And so at this time, speaking for myself, don't support the idea of a pay increase for the county commissioners. And that's my reasoning. We need to set the example. So.
Thank you. Ms. Coldwell and then Commissioner Bernard.
Thank you. I respectfully disagree. I think that we need to continue to have the quality of people serving in these positions that we have today. And that means you need to pay for what you get. So I will be supporting the increase. And when it's the appropriate time for amendments, I would like to add this one to the list.
Commissioner Bernard, Commissioner Schrader.
Last year we voted in favor of an increase. And for me, it wasn't necessarily that. It was, we looked like we were in good shape. It was more about falling too far behind. This year, we're falling too far behind and we're not in good shape, so it's a challenge for me. But, one of the things that has always driven me crazy is, if we surveyed our constituency, I don't know what the merit would be like. But generally speaking, when a merit increase for other employees occurs automatically, whether they merit it or not. So you need to kind of change that term to merit. To me means that you've done something to deserve it. Yeah. And but I know that that's a challenge that we need to really talk about. I mean, you also open up probably legal issues when you may not give somebody a pay increase because you don't believe they merit it. But that's an interesting discussion. So anyway.
Thank you.
That's all I have to say.
Commissioner Schrader, then, excuse me, Mr.
So,
Keaton, then
so
Commissioner
essentially
Saunders.
every year we do the budget. This is always probably the most uncomfortable thing we have to deal with. And I've been doing this since 2003. My cautionary tale is this, that if you don't do it now, you're going to have to do it eventually then, and then it's larger percentages. And so really, we can, I understand what we're dealing with the budget, but this process is never going to change. And at some point, if you kick it down the road, you'll be seeing double-digit kinds of, I mean, it's happened before, and it's more uncomfortable to raise it a lot than it is to incrementally keep up with the market. And I think this commission job is very difficult. It's a lot of night meetings. It's hours upon hours of work. We are the lowest paid. Let me remind people of all of our other elected officials. We've never really attempted to change anything of that sort. So I'll go with whatever the group decides, obviously, but this is the same conversation we'll continue to have long after I'm gone,
We've
quite
had it
frankly.
every year that I've been on the
Yeah,
budget
because
committee.
let's be honest, nobody wants to vote for their own increase, particularly when we're looking at larger
isn't it?
budgets. It's not a very comfortable position to be put in, which is why we have a compensation board. So it is equitable, fair, and nonpartisan, and absolutely, above board. So maybe the commissioners should recuse themselves and just let the budget
Then
committee
we wouldn't have a
decide.
quorum, I'm sorry. That
Maybe
wouldn't
somebody
work.
needs a sacrificial
That wouldn't work.
commissioner.
Mr. Caton and then Commissioner Savas.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Compensation Board for your work. I want to thank you for your expertise and your recommendations. And I don't want to make a motion, but I'd just like to make a suggestion that we consider accepting the board's recommendations other than the commissioners and look at the commissioners' increase be 3.5%, consider a 3.5% rather than 5.5. That would be a COLA basically increase. Still be within the 3% plus or minus of market. We wouldn't be too much out of line, but at least offer then the community at least some leadership in holding down your increase to the cost of living and in this challenging budget cycle. But still allow for an increase to keep from going out of parity in the future as a suggestion.
I think that's very measured and fair.
Yeah, would you like to put that on the parking lot so that we could
Make that a
follow that
consideration. to look
discussion
Yeah.
at the point in time when we get into deliberations?
Actually, I think the last 2 years.
Have we done it at this point? That would be fine too. I just want to make sure that we're doing it as we usually and generally do. Thank you, Mr. Feely.
Yes, we did.
You did.
Yeah, and Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, when I was listening to Commissioner Humberston speak, it reminded me of something. So, and I think that was really where we were a year ago at this point. And I think a few of us understood that things were not as rosy as it seemed. And I think there were a substantial number of folks, including our staff, that were suggesting that it was a lot rosier than it was. So, to me, this is the most important 2 weeks of our entire year as commissioners, is this budget. It's the most important thing. The fiscal health of our agency is really results, or the outcomes are, it affects our ability to provide services to our constituents across the board. Whether or not they elected us has no bearing whatsoever on this. This is really about the constituents we're serving, especially those that are in need. So with that, which is why I was so passionate last year, and about this, is knowing that my concern or my apprehension is that there was not really recognition of those percentages over the years. And I'll just leave it at that and just say that in light of the things we can't control at this point, which is what our staff cost, our personnel costs are, that's a reality we can't change at this point. But in the end, it's going to result in less services to our constituencies. I mean, that's bothersome. So thank you.
Mr. Feely, and then Commissioner Bernard, and then Ms. Lee.
You were next.
I think I was too, but that's okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't want you yelling at me.
Oh, well.
I would consider
yell at
your
me.
proposal, but I also want the commission to think about, we, for example, went $13,000 over budget for travel. I mean, I really think that if we accept the 3.5, which is not budgeted, we ought to look for a 3.5 reduction beyond what Gary has recommended in our costs. And some of that is travel, some of it's dues and subscriptions, but our budget actually does not reflect the total cost of the commission of this position.
That's true.
In the BCC budget. So I think that if we do, we should, if we accept the 3.5, then we ought to accept that we reduce our budget by another 3.5. Anyway, that's my.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Feely, then Ms. Lee.
Thank you,
And-
Madam Chair. So
and
the last 2 years, I've made the motion to accept the committee's report, and I do thank you for your work. This year is a little different. I mean, things are a lot tighter. We're going into a year where we're talking about major budget reductions, but I like Jeff's idea, and if you were to make such a motion, I'd be happy to second it.
Okay, Ms. Lee.
Yes, I'm new to the Budget Committee, so a question came to my mind that you probably already know the answer to, the rest of the committee. But I noticed that the sheriff's salary is somewhat compressed based on the undersheriff's salary, and I'm wondering why the district attorney's salary is not compared to the highest attorney on his staff in the same way that the sheriff's salary is compensated.
That is a good question. In the ORS that dictates the compensation board for elected officials, there is very specific language related to the sheriff that says that the sheriff can't make less than another employee in the sheriff's office.
$1.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, it
so
has to be a-
what that means, it could mean a lot of things, but what our compensation board has historically interpreted that to be is at least $1 more per month. So, during the course of the year, if an undersheriff gets a longevity increase or a cost of living increase or a merit increase, then we look at it and say, if it does go above the sheriff, we adjust it based on the compensation board's direction. But at this point in time, with the two newer undersheriffs, I think you met them the other day, we do not have that compression issue this year. And so I don't foresee that happening. But that's the only elected position that is called out in the ORS. So it's silent on the others. So you could see a chief DDA making more than the district attorney, and that, according to the ORS, is fine.
Mhm.
And the county administrator makes more than the chairs who, I mean, that's, the cat's out of the bag. Yeah.
What have you done? What have you done?
No.
Let's see how that's working out. Commissioner Savas, then Commissioner Fisher, and were you finished, Jen? And Tom? Okay.
I just want to say that later this afternoon when we speak, or when we have the BCC administration presentation, I think it'd be a greater opportunity to cover some of the topics that Commissioner Bernard just raised. I think that the 3.5%, I'm trying to equate that against our travel expenses or whatnot, which let's open that one up when we talk later on this afternoon. But I think it's a drop in the bucket compared to the positions that were added in our administration that may or may not arguably been beneficial and or even necessary to some degree. So I think I have greater concerns there, and I think there's a better capture, maybe some savings if we re-examine that.
Commissioner Fisher?
So I've always looked at this as it's not about the people, it's about the position. And I don't agree that we don't take the recommendations of a citizen committee that looks at market, that looks at all these factors, that gives us an objective view. I think veering from that sets a bad precedent for good government. The commissioners are in charge of setting the policy of a $1.2 billion budget. If you compared our responsibilities to private boards and corporations, we are wholly undercompensated for the level of responsibility. If we want quality people in these positions, people that have run businesses, who understand a profit and loss sheet, who've been successful in their lives, which I say all of us have been successful in our lives. If we want people like that in the future, I think we need to set a precedent of honoring and respecting what our Citizen Compensation Board does and says, and make it just standard. I think with a $1.2 billion budget, the total raises of this is $60,000. We could surely direct our county administrator to find those savings elsewhere. We can keep it uniform and proceed. I don't feel comfortable saying, oh, well, the treasurer should get his raise, the assessor should get their raise, but the county commission should not. We should not personalize this. It is not about us. It is not about us individually. It's about the position. It's about the future of good government. It's about establishing trust in government. It's about having quality people succeed in these roles. And that's my position and my plea to everyone to look at this objectively.
Okay, Commissioner Savas, and then I think,
Somebody will have to put a motion on the floor.
then I'd like to consider any motions that might be made, and we'll see what happens. Commissioner Savas?
I appreciate Commissioner Fisher's comments. I was reflecting back a couple decades ago. I was at a class, a leadership class, and this issue came up of elected official compensation. And I made a certain comment that was along the lines of getting qualified people in office. And to the point of making sure there's good compensation and good people in office that can have and absorb and be responsible. And I made some comments I kind of regret, but I'll say that like this, I'll at least be candid. Shortly after my comments, I was tapped on the shoulder by a professor who taught constitutional law and basically said, Commissioner, or not Commissioner, Mr., or whatever he called me his title. Hey, you, hey, buddy. You know, there is no litmus test for elected officials. Any citizen in this country is eligible to run for office, and the electors elect those people. And there's no way of selecting quality or education or any other litmus test. All it is citizenship, eligibility within that area, and that's it. So I agree with the comments and the sentiments, and I think that's what we can control as far as who we hire. But we're not hired under those same measures. We're elected.
Oh, we do have Trump for president.
Yep, thank you. Ms. Coldwell.
Yes, I would like to move an amendment to approve the recommendations of the Compensation Board for elected officials as they stand, and make the appropriation changes in the budget to reflect those changes.
Second?
It has been moved and seconded to accept the recommendation of the Compensation Board for elected officials as presented, and for the county administrator to make the necessary adjustments in the budget, which is, just as an aside, what Commissioner Fisher had pointed out, is a total of all of them for $59,494. So, any discussion?
Chair Parks, just request a vote by poll.
Yes, sir. Will do, sir. All those in favor, please raise your left hand.
Left hand?
What, right hand? I don't care. Right hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I count.
I think that's
5.
not.
All those opposed? So why do we have just 4? What am I missing?
Is someone not here today?
Oh, that's what I'm missing. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Question, sir.
Yeah.
So it passes.
It passes then if you are not voting, sir.
I'm abstaining for the reasons that I outlined. I agree with you. The problem is that my argument is completely different than your argument. It's not just the opposite sides of the same argument.
Yeah.
So.
That's right. It's always a very dicey
This is always this
situation,
way.
and I got to tell you, I mean, for me, I mean, also as in my other life as an elected official, I understand the thoughts of all the elected people as well as the folks on the budget committee. But this year, it's especially tough with the cuts that we're facing for everyone throughout. But I agree too that we've got to have the best people that we can find, and that you have a job to do as a compensation board, and we trust you to do it, and to look at whatever parameters you're looking at. I still remain confused about bringing them to parity, and then the next year it's not. So I think we'll expect more information about that before
Absolutely.
we get to that point.
Yes.
So thank you.
Chair Parks, was that 541 or was that 64?
It was 541.
541, okay, so it has
541.
not passed.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and
So actually, I want to clarify, I need help on Robert's rules. So I believe an abstention counts as a no, which means it's technically 5-5. So you don't have a majority voting yes. The majority of this count, of 10, a majority is 6.
thank
And
you.
an abstention counts as a no.
Did not realize
Really.
that. Thank you so much.
So if
for-
but I need to confirm, if I'm incorrect, someone speak up. But I believe you need 6 votes for approval.
Positive.
Okay, is there another motion maybe then?
Right, is there, okay, is there another motion to put on the table since that did not pass? Or would you like to hold that conversation until deliberations? Or what is your pleasure? Commissioner Fisher?
I would suggest that we change it and we save it until deliberation so that we can take a deeper dive into the commission budget, because I think Commissioner Savas has some points that we should consider in that budget.
Actually, I said
the
that.
overall commissioner's
Oh,
budget.
did you say that?
He did.
I think Chair Bernard said that we should look at, so I'd make that suggestion, that we
Okay.
hold
Would
it.
everybody be comfortable with that suggestion, Commissioner Chavez?
Will everyone be here?
That is a good question.
So
It
I would
depends on-
suggest, as tight as this is, that we settle it now, because I know that, Will, you have an obligation later, so in interest of
Yeah,
of
but I hope to
time
be
and-
here when we adopt the budget.
And I want to
so-
make sure that if we carry into tomorrow, that we're all here as well. So I would urge we take the vote now on this one.
Okay. Other thoughts, comments?
Well, is
Commissioner
anybody
Fisher?
interested in changing their vote now that we had the poll?
Can we take a break?
Yep.
You guys want to take a lunch break and address this immediately after lunch?
Could do that. Just don't
Maybe
talk
do-
about it during lunch.
Just don't talk about it. You can't do that unless it's just two of you or three of you, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and to that point, 6 of us are a quorum, right?
Yes.
Right, Gary?
Yes.
Yeah,
If there's 10 of you, 6 is a majority.
yep.
Right.
Which is also a quorum.
That's a quorum also.
Quorum.
Right, so,
And I was wrong. An abstention does not count as a no. Thank you,
Uh-oh.
Tom, for clarifying. So you have 5 yes, 4 no, and 1 abstention. But
abstention.
you're not at 6, which is the majority needed to pass. That's my
Gotcha.
point I'm trying to make.
that's the point. Okay, it's a majority of those who are here, but we need to have a majority of those voting that.
I'm saying the
pass
majority
something.
of the committee, there's 10 members, a majority is 6.
Uh-huh.
So 6 to vote in favor, or basically 6 to approve. If I'm wrong, someone tell me.
think that's
I believe
true.
that's correct. We'll confirm
I
that.
don't believe that's
Please
true at
do.
all.
Yeah, can you?
It's a
talk with
majority
Matt
who's
Gerke?
here or who's voting.
No, it's not a majority of who's here. If there's 6 people here, you still need 6 positive votes to
Right.
pass.
I don't believe that's
Let's
true.
confirm that. Can we hold on this so we can confirm that, please?
Okay, and then immediately when we come back from lunch, and we're returning from lunch at 12:30, not at 1 o'clock today.
And,
So
and would
when
you
we
like
return,
me
I'm sorry,
back?
Heather.
Would you like me back at,
No, no.
or
No, I think you guys are good. Thank
Okay.
you. We have all your information. We
I will
appreciate
give
your
you
work.
I'll get you the history before you meet back up.
Thank you. I
You're
would
welcome.
appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And you can just be a quick table.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I appreciate
All
it.
right.
Okay, we are adjourned for, or in recess, excuse me, for
Oh,
our
where's- I
lunch
haven't
period.
seen the
We'll be
numbers
back
for the
at
travel. Are they
12:30.
embedded? I called that salad
We
down.
will
I was like,
reconvene the budget committee as we left it just prior to our luncheon meeting. We had had some questions about what constitutes a quorum and what constitutes a pass vote. So our county administrator, Gary Schmidt, has some information for us. Mr. Schmidt, thank you.
Yes, Chair Parks, wow. So we did check Robert's Rules of Order and the bylaws of the Clackamas County Budget Committee, of which there are bylaws. And I'll just read it. Under Article 5 of the bylaws, quorum and voting. A quorum shall be present at a meeting in order for the Budget Committee to transact business. A quorum consists of a majority of all members of the Budget Committee, not just those present. So I'm taking away here, since there are 10 of you, a majority is 6. The Budget Committee can take official action only with the affirmative vote of a majority of all members, which would be 6. Proxy votes are not allowed. So confirming it takes 6 of you to approve any item.
Okay, thank you. And the vote that we took on the motion that had been on the floor right before lunch ended up being 5, 4, and 1 abstention, so it does not pass. And Ms. Caldwell?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to make a motion to reconsider the earlier motion on the table to accept the recommendations of the Compensation Board for Elected Officials.
Is there, we have a motion and a second on the table to reconsider the previous
And we're missing.
motion and vote to accept the report of the Compensation Board for elected officials as it was presented.
And we're missing a member.
I'd like to suggest we wait for Commissioner Savas
yes.
before we vote.
I would, this is
Or
an
table that
important
and
enough vote that we need to have everyone here. I'll give him a few moments and see, do you know if
Well,
he's in the
First, I
hallway
think
or?
we should charge him $100 for delay.
Yeah, there you go.
We'll Put that in the budget.
200, I heard 200 out there. Do we have a few
I
more?
got two. Do I hear three? I got two. Do I hear three?
How about four? How about four?
100 per minute.
You know, but while we're sitting here,
So, yeah, there is a motion on the floor. We can have dialogue about that, yes.
let's have a little dialogue. You
Yeah.
know, the commissioner's budget, we went over for travel. We've made some adjustments. Gary has, I should say, not me. Well, we've talked about these, and we've reduced travel by 6,000. We increased mileage reimbursement by 5,000. I think that we could work a little on what we're getting reimbursed for, reduce some of that.
Could you repeat that again? You decreased?
We decreased travel by
Travel.
6,000.
So that's not travel that includes reimbursed auto mileage?
No.
That's different travel. I
That's
got you.
per diem and travel.
I mean, I just want to make sure people understand the nuances there, the differences. in
And
those
mileage
things.
reimbursement, we added 5,000 because I think we went over this year by 5,000. We reduced casualty insurance. And that brings up the issue of board insurance that you've mentioned, that I don't know if we've done anything to price that out. That's something of interest to the board.
Is that like D&O insurance,
Yeah.
directors and officers liability
We
insurance?
don't have that here.
But you're self-insured,
That's a
so
larger issue to have a conversation with our county council
Yeah.
about. I mean, you're
Right.
protected under tort law as county employees and elected officials, but you do not have the term directors and officers insurance as normally known.
yeah, it seems like a topic for a much larger discussion.
So we have a reduction of $43,076 in the budget for the BCC
So Jim,
in
what
20.
page, what page
This,
did you
this
go?
I
Is this
actually
under tab?
just, Mary just brought this to me.
Oh, okay. Have we got copies of it? so we can see?
Oh, she's got copies.
Thank you, Laurel.
Now, so we've budgeted for the
All right.
reduction, 1.9 million, and that's a reduction of $43,076. So we've budgeted for that. So there isn't a heck of a lot of room here to play with, but
And this is just the Board of County Commissioners program within the county administration budget, which you'll hear later this afternoon from Laurel. She'll present that department's budget.
Okay, so this is,
Uh,
all right.
I would respectfully suggest, let's talk about it when we get to that point, and if as a committee you have proposals, you let me know, and let's let staff then figure out how to trim where, if needed.
I am reluctant to keep us from taking
Commissioner Savas is on his
action.
way, I just received a text.
Did you?
so
Thank you.
Matter of
Okay,
minutes.
because I was going to ask if we know when he would be here. So,
I guess
Okay.
the answer is Gary's, so.
okay.
we've decided to charge you $100.
I thought it was 200.
I thought it was
we were bidding.
400.
200 out there.
We were bidding.
It was 4.
Oh, that's right.
The last bid was 4.
My apologies, I thought it was 1 that we're
No,
reconvening.
We were
I
back
did
at
too, but
12:30
then I
today.
got told otherwise. So I was under the
Commissioner
same-
Savas, we have a motion
Right.
on the table
Reconsider.
to reconsider the previous motion that had been, the previous vote, motion and vote that had been taken regarding accepting the compensation board's recommendation for elected officials, which totals $59,494. So having everyone present now and having a motion and a second, we need to vote on that reconsideration before we move on. Mr. Caton.
Yes, I won't support that. I'd like to offer an alternative proposal in motion, if this doesn't pass, to have a 3.5% raise for the commission, and that it's an important symbolic leadership for the commission to look during these economic challenging times, at least to consider that as a and a leadership, decision around that to, yeah, it's only a couple $1,000 difference a year in income, but I think it's an important to consider, what the challenging times we have to at least offer
Black
that.
Widow.
So, alternative motion if this doesn't pass. So I just wanted to bring that
Okay,
up.
thank you. Commissioner Bernard?
Excuse me, that's up from prior.
All right, thank you very much.
Point of order, Madam Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Just be aware, the motion to reconsider is only to allow us to reconsider. So first, this has to pass, and then you have a
Exactly.
second motion to actually vote on.
Oh, so it's not on the table, it's putting it on the table and then voting on the
Vote
table.
to consider
if we wanna
whether we will put it back on the
Two-step-
table.
It's a two-step process.
Okay,
Exactly.
thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, exactly. So the motion is to reconsider our vote from the last vote, which would be, last motion and vote, which would be to accept the Compensations Board's recommendation in its entirety, which is a total of $59,494, which does include increases to several of the elected officials, including the Board of County Commissioners. That is the motion on the table.
To consider.
To consider, to vote on.
Yeah, you're
To-
only
if we
you're
could
only-
cons-
only voting to reconsider.
Right, we're not voting on the original motion. We're voting on the opportunity to reconsider the original motion. That's maybe a better way to say it, the opportunity to reconsider the original motion. All those in favor, please signify by raising your right hand. We have 6 to reconsider. All those opposed to reconsidering. We have 4 not in support of, or in opposition to reconsidering. So the vote passes to reconsider the original motion and vote that was on the table. So would you like to restate the original motion that was on the table before we went to lunch?
Yes, I move that we amend the budget to accept the recommendations of the Compensation Board for elected officials in the amount of $59,494.
It's been moved and seconded to reconsider the vote for the Compensation Board's report for elected officials to the amount of $59,494. Discussion. Mr. Caton, did you have your card up, sir? Okay.
Anything more to add at this point?
Ms. Fisher?
Yeah, I
Commissioner
think-
Fisher,
I
I'm
think
sorry.
My concern is that whatever decision this committee decides to make, it's systematic across the board. So making the commissioners different than the other elected officials, I think would be wrong. And that is why I strongly suggest that we systemize this, we make this a matter of deferring to the citizens that suggested this and deferring to the compensation committee.
Thank you.
So I have a question, and I don't know that there's an answer, but I kind of remember this question in the past. Is this statutory? Did we create this committee out of code or something? No?
No, it's statute, it's state law, isn't it?
Yes.
For all elected bodies, yes.
That
So
you have a
statute.
compensation board. Yes.
It's in statute for, state law for counties that do not have a charter,
That do not,
that
what?
do not have a charter.
A charter.
Oh, yeah, we're
law
statutory,
county.
general.
General Law
Okay.
County.
Because some counties don't actually, the commission doesn't vote on this at all.
And that would be why. Right.
Okay.
So, okay, very good. The motion is on the floor and has been seconded to accept the Compensation Board of Elected Officials report in its entirety, which is a total of $59,494 for fiscal budget 2019, 2020. All those in favor, please signify by raising your right hand. 5 in support.
Same.
All those in opposition to passing the motion, please raise your right hand.
And I'll abstain. Left.
4, 5.
We still have a 5-4 deadlock.
541.
541.
541,
Is there an
correct.
alternative
Is there
motion?
an alternative motion on the floor?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to approve the county compensation board recommendations with the adjustments of the county commissioners receiving a 3.5% increase instead of a 5.5% increase.
And the
that's it.
others,
The others would remain as
presented by the
recommended
compensation board.
compensation board.
And I'll
Second.
second that.
Oops,
No,
excuse me.
it's all right. Either way,
I'm sorry, Mr. Feely?
I'll second that motion.
Okay, all right. And Ms. Fisher? Commissioner Fisher, I'm sorry.
Just in discussion, I'll be opposing this because I think we really need to systemize it. So if the Board of County Commissioners wants to only accept a 3.5, I think that needs to be true for the other elected officials, and we should make it across the board. We shouldn't treat ourselves differently. It puts us in a bad position for governance. We shouldn't treat ourselves differently than the other elected officials.
The one thing I would point out is that there's also a bigger spread between the other officials and parity than there is between the county commissioners and parity. And I believe that's why the compensation board offered their increases at 9% and 8.1%. So I think that's an important point to keep in mind also. And Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, just real quick, I just to respond to Commissioner Fisher. We have done that before. Allowed the increase for the other elected officials and treated the commissioners different in the past.
Mr. Caton, did you have your card up for comment or no? Okay.
No, no,
Ms. Coldwell? Okay.
Yeah. And
Commissioner Fisher?
Just another point to make, it's that it's not like we are in dire economic times. What we have here is different assumptions on which the budget is being built. We are going to be going through and re-looking at all assumptions, looking at a zero-based budget, looking at what's sustainable, what's not sustainable. That's to happen within the next year. So I just want to bring that to people's perspective and to be mindful of that.
That's
not like we are in a
appreciated also,
recession or an
and-
economic crisis.
Yeah, if I may point out also, sitting as the chair, that it would appear we've had 2 votes now to accept the full report, and both have failed. I am not sure that there's a way to get to any decision based on the full compensation report. However, that may come up in discussion if this vote fails to pass. So Savas, Commissioner Savas, then Commissioner Bernard, then Commissioner Humberson.
Yeah, I just respectfully just will say that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think the status of our budget, whether it's last year or whether it's this year or it's years coming, how we perceive it is different individually. And so I won't want to say that because I think it's a certain way, it doesn't mean that everyone else should think it's a certain way. So I will just say that it's a concern, and I think that the $11 million+ miscalculation of the forecast that's contained in the packet that we received on Saturday demonstrates that. And later on, we'll be talking about other aspects of upcoming expenditures that'll put us in a far more concerning way than otherwise. So I think that's a shortfall that we have not identified a solution for. So therefore, I don't want to use the word dire, but I think I could.
Before we have Commissioners Bernard and Humberson, our county administrator has comments to make. Thank you, Mr.
Just very quickly, there was a handout that should have been on your places that has the history of the compensation board.
Yes.
Recommendations and then board budget committee actions over the last 5 years, if that helps you make your decision today.
Yes, thank you, and I did note a couple of things in that, so thank you very much for pointing that out. I hope everyone has had the opportunity to look at that
Oh, here it is.
and see what some of the history has been for all of those elected officials. Commissioner Bernard, then Commissioner Hubbardson.
So I lean towards Commissioner Fisher, 3.5 for those recommended to get an increase, not those that are not. So I'm probably going to vote no on this too, because that was actually something that I was going to make a motion on. Actually, I got prices. It's about half the cost to go 3.5 across. So it's not like it's a whole ton of money anyway, but I'd probably go with the 3 across, 3.5 for all those recommended to get an increase.
I got you. In other words, it would not include those 3 on the list of elected officials who were not included in that. I got you. Commissioner Humberston.
You're excluding the sheriff. You don't
Excluding the sheriff and the justice of the peace.
Well, we're not, basically, it's 3.5.
The sheriff wasn't scheduled to have an increase.
Well, right, but he's on the list. So.
No, I
He said excluding
only
those who weren't.
Who are recommended to get
Right.
an
There are 3, I believe, without looking at the page. Mm-hmm.
Does that, I'm sorry, does that mean 3.5% for the assessor instead of 9%?
Yeah.
But that's not the motion on the floor.
No, that's
Correct.
not the motion on the floor.
But I'll make that motion if this one.
You can't, oh,
After we,
Yeah, we
I
have.
just think we need a
you
systematic
could offer an
process.
amendment and get a second.
Well, we could see how this one goes. I think if people really think about this, they may come back to thinking maybe we should go with, just let's see how this goes.
I don't know. Commissioner Humberston, then Commissioner Savas.
Yeah.
I guess what I would say, at least the my initial reaction was that we're asking staff to look at budget cuts throughout their departments, but they do, because of contract negotiations, should get and will get about 3.5% in pay increase as a result of the contract negotiations. So this at least would be consistent with what we have approved for staff, where the 5.5 and some of the others are not consistent with what we approved for staff. So it's at least a reasonable compromise position.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Savas, and then Ms. Coldwell.
We don't have our staff that were here earlier to confirm this, but it's my understanding that there's at least 2 departments of elected officials that if you reduce the staff recommendation or the elected official compensation board's recommendation, I think there's at least 2 of those where some of the staff will be making more than the elected official.
But that's not the motion on the floor.
I understand that.
Okay.
I understand that. So I just want to keep that in people's mind that if you support or not this, if you go towards the other, then the other would result in that scenario.
Ms. Coldwell.
Thank you. I will be supporting this motion, even though it is truly a symbolic gesture. It is a total of $2,114 a year difference between 3.5% and 5.5% for the entire board. So it's decimal dust. It's a nice gesture, but I will be supporting the motion.
Okay.
No other cards are up.
No other cards are up. The motion on the floor, and I may have to get some help on this.
You know what, I just have to say something, I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
Again, I've
Commissioner
been doing
Schrager.
this since 2003, and I'll be honest with you, this is an equitable pay issue, and as a woman who had to work my whole life and teacher and had to fight to prove I had a master's degree to get equitable pay in school systems, you know, to me this is a pay equity issue too as a woman. Just saying, I think we consistently have gotten underpaid. I think that the best thing that ever happened, even though it's going to cost us a boatload of money, rightly so, is the fact that finally there's an Equitable Pay Act for women here. So you will be standardized across the board based on your ability, based on your degrees, and based on your level of experience. So that's my editorial, and I'm done. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments before we vote? Restating the motion. The motion is to reduce the recommended, reduce to 3.5 from 5.5, the recommendation of the Compensation Board for the members of the Board of County Commissioners, but to leave the others in the amounts that they were presented to us by the Compensation Board for elected officials. Am I restating that correctly? Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Caton. All those in favor of the vote, please raise your hand, your right hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those opposed? 4, 6, 4. Motion passes. Thank you.
That, I think, was the longest individual discussion of any item we have had this entire time.
Just remember, fair pay for equal work.
Yeah. That's a tough one. Yeah. That's for sure.